Hi, I'm Bridget Douglas and I play flute in the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. Today I'd like to talk to you about the tone of the flute and how you can perhaps improve your own tone on your flute playing. The tone that we produce is the sound, it's our voice on our instrument. And as such, it's really important that we have a lovely, warm, beautiful tone that people want to listen to. It's all very well to have a fantastic finger technique and great breathing and all these other and be really musical. But if you don't have a beautiful sound, no one's going to want to listen to you. So here, from my years of teaching and traveling around New Zealand, listening to students across the country, I have a few tips of things to do and things not to do. One of the first things that I think is the most important thing in producing a good tone, and to help you produce a good tone, is to have a great posture. It seems like such a no-brainer, right? Of course, everyone needs to have a good posture, whatever instrument you play. But it's amazing how many people lean into the flute when they go to, so instead of taking the flute all the way up to them, they go. And then they wonder why they don't sound so good. But really, the rule is you must stand nice and straight, pretend that you're a puppet on a string, so you have like a string sort of pulling you up nice and tall, and that you bring the flute all the way up to your mouth. You don't lean into the flute, and you don't lean into your music on the music stand. Make sure that your glasses or your eye prescription is sorted so that you don't have any vision problems. So bring the flute all the way up to you. And the reason why is because we want to have this area here, our chest and our neck, nice and open. We want to sort of mimic the body language of an opera singer or just a very fine singer. You don't ever see a great singer sort of like this singing to the ground. Our tone is produced here at our mouth from the lip plate, and we want it to be nice and open and the sound to travel directly out and opposite. Think about always throwing your sound out to the wall opposite you or to the back of the hall. So if you're playing in a hall, always think about the sound going to the last row in the audience, as far away as you can. Now, after having a good posture, it's really important that the flute is well balanced, that we're holding the flute nice and stable. If the flute's wobbling around, if we're not quite comfortable with how we're playing the flute, it's going to be all slippy and slidey up here. And it really needs to be nice and stable right here in order for us to have a good solid tone. So there are three main balance points. I'm sure many of you know this information already, but sometimes it's just good to be reminded of all those things that your teacher has probably already told you. So the three main balance points on the flute are our right hand thumb. We want to have that on the back wall of the flute, sort of under about, sort of somewhere between like the third key or the fourth key, not too far down, about the third, underneath the third or fourth key, and not too far forward. If it's too far forward, the flute will turn and slip around backwards. We want to be supporting and thinking about pushing the flute up and away with that right hand thumb, up and away. The second main balance point on the flute is this joint here on the left hand. And it rests, as I'm sure this is usually quite a hard one to do wrong, so I'm sure most people have got this right. It sort of rests underneath that top key on the upper side of the flute body. Now, this balance point is equal and opposite to the right hand thumb. So the right hand thumb was pushing up and away. The left hand joint here is pushing up and in. So we have these two opposing, equal and opposite forces that need to be equal in order for the flute to be balanced. If you've got one too strong and one too weak, then you end up having a really wobbly flute. Now, I said there were three main balance points. The third balance point is actually more of a resting place, and it's a resting place for the lip plate of the flute, and it's the chin. It needs to have quite not a firm grip here, but it needs to just be resting and stable there. You don't want it to be too loose, because otherwise you'll be chasing the embouchure hole around. You don't want it to be too pushed in and too tight. If this left hand is pushing too hard, you'll end up feeling all squeezed and tight and tense here. So it just should be resting nice and stably, so that when you do a scale, it feels nice and balanced. One of the most important pieces of equipment that we need for checking all of this out is a mirror. So apart from having a good flute, you want to always be practicing in front of a mirror as much as possible. So you can actually look at your hands, at your mouth, at the position of the flute, to check that everything is the way it should be. Sometimes we feel like we're doing something, but it doesn't really look like that when we check and we realise we have to correct. Even myself, I've been playing the flute for so many years, I still do lots of mirror practice. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about that affects the tone of the flute is our embouchure. I'm sure most of you know what the embouchure is. The embouchure is the shape of the lips, which and it's a French word for mouth or lips. So we want the lips, the embouchure, to be as relaxed and tension-free as possible. So one of the mistakes I see with younger flute players in particular, when they're trying to make a nice sound on the flute, is they're actually working too hard with their lips, with their embouchure. So this is a list of things you don't want to be doing when you're playing the flute. You don't want to be smiling, because that really makes the corners of your mouth very tight. You don't want to be frowning, because that also makes the corners of your mouth really tight. You don't want to be sort of kind of kissing, you don't want that sort of you don't want the lips going forward too much. You don't want to be doing the opposite of that. You don't want to be making the lips too thin. I sometimes see people going, ugh. And they wonder why their sound's not so good. So all of those things, the kissing, the thin lips, the smiley, the frown, those tones are really not that beautiful. And the reason why those shapes don't work for the mouth is because we actually want this very centre part of our lips, with the small hole. We want it to be quite a small hole. And I think a common problem with young flute players is that the embouchure hole here in the centre of the lips tends to be too big. And you get that sort of really breathy sound and you feel like you're running out of air. So the ideal shape is actually just a very, very natural shape. And one really good way of practicing this sort of very, very natural shape is by putting grains of rice, just individual grains of rice, on your tongue and then spitting them out. And that sort of spitty shape that you make when you're spitting out a grain of rice is the right sound, as long as you back it up with lots of air. I'm imagining that I'm spitting the grain of rice out of my mouth, and then with a continuous stream of air behind it. So it's like a continuous stream of rice grains coming out of your mouth. You could even try it with real rice. And actually, I have done that, and it's quite fun. The whole point of the spitting rice demonstration and that exercise is about getting the air stream going in the right direction. What's happening when we blow the flute, ideally, is that the air is hitting the opposite wall on the lip plate there, just the edge of that opposite wall. So if we aim too high, we get a really breathy sound. If we aim too low, you get a really sort of tight, squeezed sound. So ideally, again, we're trying to, with our image in our mind of spitting rice, we should ideally hit that opposite edge of the lip plate. And I really like to have the idea of spinning the sound, of imagining visually what my sound is like, and that it's almost like a spool of silk that I'm spinning, and it's being pulled out of the lip of the embouchure hole here. So imagine that sense of the evenness of the air and the consistency of the airstream direction. We don't want to be sort of changing the airstream direction or changing the speed of the air. Okay, so we want to have that lovely unforced natural feeling here. Now that sense of being tension free and of being as relaxed as possible is important everywhere around here. So I did hint before that we don't want any sense of pushing in here, because then you end up with a very sort of thin sound. That sort of very tight sound. We want our sound to be as warm and rich as possible. Another common problem is people put the lip plate too high on their lip. So they put it up sort of around, sort of halfway up the pink part of the lip. But again, that is also quite inhibitive for the sound. It really limits the sort of different sound colours that you can get. So try and put it up high. Again, very, very thin. So the best place is actually just below the pink part of the lip. And sometimes people are not sure how much of the lip plate of the embouchure hole here to cover. I'd suggest only about a third to a half. Definitely no more than a half covered by the lip. If you cover too much, you're actually going to, you're going to limit the possibilities of the tone. So now, stating the obvious, obviously we all have very different faces and very different lips, different shapes, different sizes, different dimensions, all of that stuff. And that means that sometimes we're not completely symmetrical. In fact, apparently very few people in the world are symmetrical. And I'm definitely one of those asymmetrical people, because my embouchure actually sits naturally to the right quite a long way, and it's, looks quite crooked. When I was a kid, my flute teacher was always trying to correct and put it back in the middle, but after years of sort of trying very unsuccessfully to move it back into the middle, I realised that there were actually tons of flute players out there that play on, with their embouchure not dead set in the middle. So please don't panic if your embouchure is slightly off to the side. It might just mean that you've got a little bit of asymmetry, just like me. And that all affects our tone. So ideally, we want to have our own unique sound. So we want to create something that's special and unique to us. So there's not one size fits all with tone. There are lots of different ways of having a beautiful sound. And there are also lots of different ways of putting the flute lip plate up here. But those points that I've just made, I think will help you create a better sound. Now, should we move on to, I think we're going to move on now to some exercises to help you develop a better tone. I'm going to point you in the direction of my favourite exercise, which is pretty much every flute player's in the world, flute teacher in the world's favourite exercise. It's by Marcel Moyse, and comes from his De la Sonority. It's a very, very simple exercise, and sometimes my students say that it's boring because it's, quite repetitive, but actually it really gets you to focus specifically on the tone, the consistency and the evenness of the tone. And I'm a big fan of doing this every day, encouraging my students to do it every day. Even if it's just for 10 minutes a day, it's better to do a little bit of tone exercise every single day that you practice. You're allowed to have some days off, it's okay. Rather than just sort of going overboard and practicing tone for an hour every Sunday. You won't really get the results if you're not doing it regularly. And the other really important thing is to listen very, very carefully to yourself. I think it's all very well to practice exercises on the flute, but if you're not really concentrating and listening critically to your sound, you're also not really going to be developing your own special sound, your own special tone. So Moise's exercise, de la sonorité, we start on the B in the stave, this one, with a better sound. Okay, that B there, we're going to go down in semitones. So we're going to go B flat. And as we go down with those two chromatic semitone notes, we're going to do a diminuendo. And then ideally you'd go back and you'd repeat them. As we go down the register, so then we go from B flat to A, then A to A flat to G, etc. As we go down and descend into the lower register, which is often a problem area for flute players, we want to try and maintain an evenness of sound. So the reason we start on the B is because it's often one of the easiest notes to produce a good sound on. And so as we descend, we want to try and keep the same quality. So we listen really carefully. Etc. We keep going down. And if you feel that the lower note that you've played is not as good as the upper note, go back and repeat it. So we try and mimic the quality of the upper note. And you'll find after doing that for a week or two, you should really, really notice a huge improvement in the consistency of your sound. You should also, I recommend going up the register. So starting on that B and ascending rather than descending. Etc. So you keep going up. Again, we're looking for that consistency all the way through the different registers of the flute. Another exercise to help improve your tone is using extended techniques. I do love playing contemporary music, and there are a couple of extended techniques that are often used in modern pieces that I find really useful for helping develop tone. One of those exercises involves harmonics. For those of you that are not sure what harmonics are, they're really just the overtone series. So when you play the bottom octave notes on the flute, say for example a low C, keep the same fingering and you overblow, which you would have done by accident if you haven't done it on purpose. So when I was doing that, I didn't change my fingering at all from the low C. And what I was thinking about is really a very well supported and consistent airstream, and try not to tense up here, trying to keep it nice and relaxed. I'll show you again. You can use any of these bottom sort of fundamental notes. If you've got a B foot joint, you can use the B, C, C sharp, D, E flat. I'll use a D now, and ideally, when I play the low D, I'm going to try not to change or tighten or tense my mouth, especially around the edges here. I'm going to keep the focus right on the middle there and really support here. Now I'm going to start without changing my fingers, so I'm still on the low D fingering. I'm going to start on that harmonic we just arrived at and overblow to the next one. Now, again, we start on the one we arrived at and overblow to the next one. Again, as we go higher, we have to concentrate really hard on not getting all tight here. And this is another instance of where the mirror can be super helpful. And you can keep going as high as you want, but what I would say is don't go so high that you feel like you're starting to get tight. Even if you can only get the first or second harmonic, that's still really beneficial. And you really should feel that lovely connection with the ear. Another extended technique that I like to use to help develop the tone is singing and playing at the same time. I mentioned earlier that our voice is heard through the flute, but we really are an extension. The flute is just an extension of singing for us. So we need to have that same physical connection to our bodies that singers do in order to feel that sense of the breath and the resonance within us, feel our sound coming from deep within us. So a lovely exercise is to sing and play at the same time. I find it really helps open up the throat, the back of the throat, the mouth, and the chest cavity. So say if you play, just even, we do that Moyes exercise again, the B to B flat. But this time we add the voice to it as well. So we sing the same pitches. Obviously that's not the sort of flute tone that we're going for, but you should feel it nice and open in here. You can really play anything you want. And there's a real sense of openness. And then when you go back to playing without the voice, you should feel that openness help the tone be a little richer and warmer. I hope you found this video on tone useful. Please do leave any questions in the comment section, and you can find lots more videos featuring the NZSO and the NZSO players on live.nzso.co.nz. I hope you have lots of fun practicing your flute and making a beautiful tone.